settle in. Start just a second. Good evening, good evening. All righty, I see the numbers settling, so we will get started. So good evening and welcome everyone. My name is Crystal Cummings and I'm one of the Community Engagement Managers with the Office of Student, Family, and Community Advancement. I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us this evening. I'd like to give a special thank you to you, our special education community. That includes our students, parents and guardians, school leaders, teachers, support staff, community members, and city leaders. Also, a special thank you to SPEDPAC, SEAC, and BEJA for your continuous advocacy work. Just as an FYI, this meeting is being recorded and we will certainly post it to our website at www.bostonpublicschools.org/reopening so that you can share it with anyone who might have missed the meeting. Now let me introduce the panel you see in front of you. We are thankful to have our ASL interpreters, Travis and Sana. Thank you for being with us today, here today. Presenters, this is a reminder for us to be mindful of our pace so that the interpreters can keep up. We have our community engagement team, our director, Miriam Ortiz, and managers Jelani Haynes and Alba Cruz Davis. We also have Dana Engel, special assistant with us. Thank you for being here. They are all working hard in organizing these community sessions. From our Office of Special Education, we have Ethan Diablemont-Burns, Assistant Superintendent, and Lisa Connor, our Parent Support Coordinator. And of course, we have Tammy Poost, our Senior Advisor, and last but not least, our Superintendent, Dr. Brenda Caselius. This is our second webinar, and currently we have, let's take a peek how many people we have on the call. We have about 240 people on the call, so we're so grateful for your engagement with us this evening. As a brief overview, this is our 23rd community meeting since June. So far, we have engaged with young people, parents, including 3 language-based meetings, teachers and staff, including nurses and custodians, school leaders, partners, and countless other BPS advocates. We appreciate everyone's thoughtful recommendations and questions around the reopening of schools and your willingness to come to the table during these extremely difficult and uncertain times. Our objective this evening is to get your thoughts, suggestions, and concerns around fall reopening, as well as to give you a snapshot of where the district is in their planning. We will have a welcome from the superintendent and special education team, and a presentation, followed by a question and answer session where and during that question and answer session, we will actually alternate between taking raised hands and pre-submitted questions. So before we begin our presentation, I'm gonna start by turning it over to Dr. Caselius to say a warm welcome.
Thank you, Crystal, and thanks to the whole incredible community who is joining us today, and also to our community advancement team that has just been fabulous with all of these meetings and trying to do engagement. As many of you know, as Crystal said, this will be our 23rd meeting, and we have many more still on the books. We released our draft plan to the school committee last Wednesday, in order to get ahead of the game before we have to turn it into DESE, the state, on August 10th. That's the requirement, but we wanted to do it early so that we could get your feedback, to get our teachers working in their working stream so that they could better help us with what is learning actually going to look like in the classroom, and then also to do our equity analysis. So we had all of the data gathering for our equity analysis, but the third step of that is stakeholder engagement. And before we came to any final decisions, we wanted to be able to make sure we had the stakeholder engagement. We did our implementation assessment, and then the accountability and communications parts of our equity tool. And also that we had the opportunity to talk to all of you in specific groups for language groups, also students with disabilities, and some of our special populations, and making sure we get out there. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on the presentation. I will be brief because we really want this time to be where you're able to give us feedback, able to give us your questions and concerns, so that we have those, can register those, and then add those to the list of emerging themes that we are seeing, so that they can inform the broader decision that we will be bringing forward and to the State Department of Education on August 10th. Next slide. So why don't we put up the presentation, Crystal? I think it's back one. Oh, okay. So I just want to say one more thing before we get started into the presentation. Some of you maybe have seen that the DESE guidance, the State Department put out some guidance around transportation. And some of you may have some questions about that. We will cover a little bit about that in social distancing on our buses. Also, they put out some guidance last week around how we do art and music and physical education and the visual arts and performing arts. They also put out some guidance just yesterday around 10 days before school opens for teachers to be prepared for the safety of our students and of our whole school community. So we are still looking at all of those recommendations. They've just been put out. We don't have updates on those at this time, but I wanted to make you aware of them because they are out in the news. Next slide. So some of the decisions that we have made that are in our draft plan are that we are going to be basing this on science. We are going to be basing this from our CDC guidance, and also from our Boston Health Commission, and really Chief Martinez, who has been a partner of ours from the city since day one, and all of his staff really helping to guide us in this decision making, so that we can make sure everybody's safe when we go back to school. That all students will be required to wear masks. Also, we will be requiring one student per bench on each bus. That will cut our population on our bus quite a bit. So that obviously is a consideration, and there may be some things that we will need to do to control for the amount of students on a bus. They will need to be masked on the bus, and they will need to stay in their seat when they're on the bus. Most likely they will be in an assigned seat when they're on the bus. We won't have food in cafeterias. They will be in the classrooms. There will be, again, health protocols on the bus and building sanitation. Our school nurses will be trained in response and contact tracing. They will also be monitoring any students who have suspected exposure or who might appear to be not well. We won't have group gatherings if the community infection rates are outside of an acceptable range. We have not set what that acceptable range is yet. We will be working with the state on that when that comes out in the guidance. Next slide. There's several different models that we are required to turn in by August 10th. Those are a fully remote model, a hybrid model, which we'll spend some time discussing today, and then an all-in-person model. Again, July 31st, we're supposed to signal to the commissioner which model we are really looking at, and then August 10th, our full plan is supposed to be turned in. Next slide. So some of the reopening survey that we have is just, we've put out a general survey that we kept open just to get some sense of where our community was at and what parents were thinking, what our staff was thinking. But we'll send out another survey as we get closer to more of a final draft, asking parents explicitly if they are going to be choosing remote or if they will need, or if they will be choosing a hybrid model and doing some in school. We kind of see it all over the place. So we have about 23% saying that they would like to be fully online. We have about 40% saying they'd like to be some blended, some part of the day in school and some part of the day remote, and part of the week in remote, I mean. And then also in person, around 30% in person, and then about 9% not sure. Now, if we disaggregate this by race, we see that this is very different. And so you can see that the races feel very different about this, where you have your Latinx population, for instance, about 37% saying they want to be fully online, and the Black population, 33% saying they want to be fully online, and the white population saying about 6% fully online. And then with the hybrid model, a little bit of a mix there as well, but similar with those same types of percentages, with Black families choosing about 43% blended, and about 30% Latinx families choosing blended, and then about, I think that's 30, I can't see it so small, 38%, I think, blended model. And not really too many people not having any opinion at all on, you know, as not sure, about 10% writing about not sure, but a number of differences there for in-person. So from our smallest group of in-person being Black students at about 16% choosing that they'd want to be all in person, to white families choosing about 36% all in person. Next slide. So if you break that out by students with disabilities and how they are feeling, we had about 336 who did not respond. Students who within our response range, whether they had a disability or not. And then we had students with disabilities, about 4,000 families, students with disabilities responded to the survey. And if you look to the right, you can see that they, you know, where they're at about with fully online, about 86 families or students. I'm not sure if this is an N number, I think. 86 wanted fully online. With the no response, about 108 blended, and then in person about 92. And then with students with disabilities, let's look at that line, about 1,337, around 33% said that they would like to be fully online. And about another 1,500 are saying that, you know, which is about another 40% saying that they'd like some sort of blended model. And then about another 20% there saying that they would like in person. Next slide. And if school reopens in the fall and students are expected to return to buildings with social distancing measures in place, what is the likelihood you would choose to return to your position is the question that we posed to some of our teachers. And at this time, you know, when we were doing this survey and it was open, we had about 48% of our teachers saying they're very highly likely to come. And then another approximately 40% said that they're somewhat likely. So really only about 10% of teachers or staff saying that they are not likely to return. And many of them probably for the reasons of having some underlying condition or some other significant reason why they would not be able to come. Next slide. So the draft under consideration right now that we really have been trying to give families more information about is the K-8 hybrid A-B model. This is different than what the high schools will do. We are still working with our high school leaders around their scheduling and how that will work for them. They may choose a different type of in-person and out-of-time model for them. And so we'll be working with them on a case-by-case basis. So this, we're really talking about elementary school and our K-8 schools. So we are talking about an A-B hybrid model, 2 days on, which would be with one group, and then 3 days on remote for the other group. And then they would flip-flop. So say Monday, Tuesday, you have 2 days on for group A. Wednesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, they would be on remote. And then the other group would then be in class and in school Thursday, Friday, and remote on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. You noticed nobody is in school on Wednesday so that we could do a cleaning between the two groups on Wednesdays. Again, 6 feet of social distancing would be enforced and masks. Teachers also would be wearing protective equipment, and teachers would be teaching some of the portion of the day or most of the day remotely and also in person. Possible exceptions are some special education classes if can be met with social distancing requirements and appropriate PPE for the specific disabilities and for their specific needs. But we will need to have parent input into how we plan for each and every child because every child has different needs. You know, some children may have needs that are medical in nature. Again, I mentioned this about high schools. They might be on 1 week on or 1 week off or some other variation of how they do in person and out of person learning or out of school learning. Supports as needed will include, you know, training on both online and in person. They'll get training on tech tools and how to use the new technologies within their classroom, project-based learning and synchronous learning, what's called flipped classroom, where teachers will do some videotaping ahead of time and do some independent study and guided study. So that's all being discussed right now with our academic team and our teachers in working groups who started meeting last week and are still meeting this week and will continue to meet as we begin to get ready for school start. Paraprofessionals will also be trained and provided assistance and also will know how to use the technology. And then they'll have collaborative planning time to be able to develop their lessons together and work together as educators. And this will also be to do collaborative time with our service providers within the disability. So they'll have time with, say, their PT or their OT providers, and they will also have time with mental health providers or social workers and our school nurses and other professional staff within the school building. Next slide. So some of the hybrid model is, this is just kind of seeing the picture of how this might look, where group A comes Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday, there's remote learning and deep cleaning of the buildings, and that means coming in and using the foggers and really wiping all of the high touch areas, cleaning all the bathrooms and the waste baskets and desks down and all of that. And then Thursday, Friday being remote. Then group B flips. They are on the computers and they're online and doing remote for the 2 days. And then they will do the 3 days of remote the other Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So then some people have said, well, what does the classroom look like? It looks very different than what it was typically, and teachers, you know, have spent a lot of the good past decades really moving away from desks in a row, but we do need to guarantee that desks are able to be 6 feet apart when the students are here. So you may see desks in a row, but some desks will be used and other desks will not be used depending on if you are in group A or group B. So if a student's coming and he's in group A, he'd be sitting there up in the upper left-hand corner, and there would be nobody sitting next to him in the desk that is a group B student, and then they will be 6 feet apart because the next group A student would be over to the right three corners, 3 desks, so you can see that. Next slide. So parents are going to have the opportunity to opt in and choose to have students stay home if they want to, and they can be remote. They can also opt out, and parents can choose to opt out of bus transportation if they are not feeling comfortable with riding the bus. They can start remote for all if health numbers spike and they'd stay down. So if we don't if we don't have the numbers quite where we want them to mitigate the virus within the whole community, then we may not be able to still have school open, and we may have to flip and be ready to be very nimble to go for remote for all students. If the state was to say that, or if the city was to say that from the Boston Health Commission. These are not decisions we would be making on our own. We would be basing them in science. And of course, if there's been no decision made just yet, but we are hoping to be able to start with some in school time if our numbers do stay low. Next slide. So let me talk a little bit about our buses and how they're going to be cleaned and sanitized every night. The bus driver and everybody else will have masks provided. Hand sanitation devices will be available so that students can have their hands washed when they come on the bus. There's one student per bench. They do allow for some siblings if siblings are going to the same school. Monitors need to be on the bus and students need to be in assigned seats. There will be loading and unloading protocols to adhere to the 6 feet of social distancing. And then if we'll be monitoring for any notice of any student who does not appear to be well. Next slide. So our buildings are also getting ready. So we've been doing a lot to get our buildings ready. Every building has been getting cleaned and sanitized. They will also be cleaned and sanitized overnight. Entries, exit, and hallways will be marked for traffic lanes. Also, classrooms are going to be rearranged, as I shared in the previous slides, for social distancing. The common areas are going to be repurposed if necessary to have additional spaces for students to be socially distanced in their classrooms, where we have schools that are quite full in capacity. There'll be lots of signage around for reminders for social distancing, for how to wash your hands. And so there'll be a lot of routines that children will learn around how to do proper safety protocols within the school and around their expected behavior. This is not, we will not be punitive. We are going to be working with students around, singing of songs in the little grades and different kinds of protocols and how we get kids up and moving around the room. All of that will be strictly adhered to. And then if there are any public health complaints around sanitation protocols, we'll have practices in place to remedy those and fix those and then that will typically involve, more cleaning and more deep cleaning. And we'll be doing that deep cleaning on Wednesdays, and we'll be doing it over the weekend or on Fridays. Next slide. So our cafeterias are getting ready. Some of our cafeterias are smaller than others. And so, as you know, many of the schools have been shifting to My Way Cafe, thanks to the Shaw Family Foundation and their generosity to work with the city to be able to get higher quality food to our students. And we will be really still working on those high quality offerings. And those food prep areas are going to also be rearranged for social distancing. There will be grab and go breakfast for students. Lunch will be prepared and heated on the site, and it will be delivered to classes and then picked up for students in their classrooms and disposed of in special trash cans. And boxes of meals will be available for students who will be online or remote. Next slide. So our nurses and our health supports are getting ready as well. They're putting in the protocols for medical evaluation and potential isolation rooms in case a child is sick, so that they can sit safely for their parents to come pick them up. Testing is not required to start, but required for any reported exposure. So we will be trying to make sure that they're tested. Enforcement of quarantine required following positive test results is going to be very necessary for keeping the community safe. We will have isolation rooms identified at every single school. Classroom and floor building district closure plans are triggered by our Boston Health Commission guidance. Again, this is by the science, or it's triggered by the state if there's something that is given down through the entire state as something that needs to be adhered to. And of course, we will also do contract tracing if necessary to keep the whole community safe. Healthcare levels and PPE is going to be required for our nurses. We are going to reconfigure all of our spaces so that we have the proper social distancing and training on all COVID relating protocols. We are also being mindful of our staffing to ensure that we have sufficient substitutes in place so that our nurses can take respite if they need it, but also have available if they do need to have a family emergency or something else, they can't be at the school. And then of course, we are going to be asking parents to help us with this home health screening before they send their children to school. And so we'll need their partnership in helping us make sure that children are ready to go to school, that they've washed their hands, they have their mask on, and they don't have fever, and they're healthy and well to come. Next slide. So our teachers are working really hard right now, working on these working groups with our academic team at the central office to look at the methods that will be used within the classroom. We simply don't want children, and for all of us, just to mitigate learning loss. We want our children to thrive. So we just got some special guidance from the commissioner last week about how we should teach music and how we should teach art and use outdoor spaces and how we can incorporate PE. And so we'll be looking at all of that guidance in this academic planning with our teachers. And of course, the teachers and staff will also do these protocols around coming to work and making sure that they're healthy. They'll have specialized PPE at different grade levels and you know, for different kinds of conditions for what they would need it for. You know, if they're working with medically fragile students, for instance, or if they need to do toileting or something like that, that they would be ready to be able to work with our new students who need that kind of support. Also, we will reconfigure classrooms for the social distancing. They'll have sneeze guards and dividers will be available to where it's needed. It may not be at every single classroom, but it will be available where needed. We are training on all COVID related protocols, symptom recognition, and we are working with our nurses on that. And if we see anything, we'll make the referrals to the nurse because they're the trained professionals to help us with that. Our classrooms will be disinfected every night. Our pods of students will be maintained to limit exposures, so they'll be in family groups and in pods, so that they won't be going from mixing with other pods when they're in their groups. We of course are encouraging outdoor play space for students to be able to go outdoors and to do outdoor gardening if they have that, and other activities outside for play. And actually learning as well with our outdoor classrooms. Some of our schools have those. And then there will be some limits, as you probably see as you've been out and about already, on the numbers of folks that can be in an elevator. So, because you have to still properly distance within the elevator as well. And then we'll have staggered times and usages and schedules for bathrooms and hallway travel. This is also true of our lockers, which have to be distanced apart as well at the upper grades. Next slide. So getting our students ready. Oftentimes us adults have a little bit harder time than our students do with some of these rules and getting ready. So we're getting them to school. We're helping them navigate school. They'll be learning in school, and they'll also have some before and after school supports at schools where they've had those previously, and then they'll adhere to those same social distancing requirements and PPE requirements in whatever program that they're at school, and everybody will have the same protocols around adherence to those safety measures. Next slide. So, you know, this is going to be not easy. You know, we all know that this is going to be quite a challenge as we all adjust to our new normal. And as teachers get up to speed, they will get better and better at how to deliver remote learning, how to do hybrid learning. They're very creative. And then also just the safety and health protocols that we have to put in place for all of us. And what I'd like to do is ask for all of us now to put on our mask when we go outside, socially distance, be very careful if we're mixing with other extended family groups at funerals or at barbecues or at the beach, because the virus is still around. There is not a vaccine. And the best thing we can do to get our children in school is to really be a village now and protect it from community spread. And Boston has done that better than just about any other state, and Massachusetts has done it better than any other state, and Boston better than many other cities across the nation. Our incident rate is, I think, 2.1, and that's very low. And so we are going to continue to watch that very carefully day to day, and that will help inform our decisions. Next slide. I think that's it, right?
That is all. Thank you, Dr. Caselius. Dana, you can feel free to pull it down. Thank you so much. So I know that was a lot of information. So I'm just going to give you all a minute to digest what you've heard in the PowerPoint. Think about some questions that you want to ask today. If you're unfamiliar, we're going to move into our Q&A session. And if you're unfamiliar with how to raise your hand using the raise hand Zoom feature, it should be at the bottom middle of your screen. You should see a button that says raise hand, so you can get your questions ready. And again, we'll be alternating between pre-submitted questions and live raise hands. But before we do that, I'm just gonna check in with our Office of Special Education team. Ethan or Lisa, did you want to provide any brief remarks before we jump into Q&A? Just 1 second, Ethan. You should unmute yourself.
Okay. Thank you so much, Crystal. I appreciate it. And Dr. Caselius, thank you so much for that overview of what's happening. I think we're looking like we're getting there, which is exciting. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Ethan Dalbemont-Burns, and I am the new Assistant Superintendent for Special Education, and excited to meet you all and to have, at least virtually, and I really look forward to having the opportunity to partner with you in this really important work. Just briefly, I was at the Manning School for over 11 years, where we built a pretty successful model of inclusion, including students with emotional impairments, and also boosted academic achievement tremendously. So hoping to take some of that knowledge district-wide, and also learn a lot from all of you and all the other different school leaders across the district, because I think there are a lot of good things happening and we need to figure out how to spread those good things. Just quickly, a few notes on what's happening in the fall with regard to special education. Two most important notes. Number one, that IEPs will be fully implemented in the fall no matter what model we're going into. When we left in March, there was some question about that, and there was some ambiguity, and now there is not. No matter what environment we choose, the expectation is that the IEP will be implemented, and we will all work together to figure out how to make sure our students get what they need as reflected in the IEP. So that's number one, and that includes, I should say, transportation, to make sure that the transportation needs are met. The second thing I want to say is just that as an office, we are going to work really hard to increase our family and community engagement. We know that we will end up with a better experience for our children, a more successful experience for our children if we partner with all of you and get input from all of you. So Lisa Connor is here this evening, and she put her information into the chat so that we can work hard to reach out to you specifically from the Office of Special Education, not just the Office of Community Engagement, so that we can really figure out how to make sure our students have a great experience. And Lisa's already has a plan in place to reaching out to different groups on a weekly basis. And obviously I am also communicating with SPEDBAC on a regular basis as well. So that's a little bit about me and the Office of Special Education, and I look forward to hearing other questions. Thank you so much.
Lisa, did you want to add anything before
Yeah,
I
I just wanted to add, hi everybody, it's Lisa Connor, and I'm sure I've talked to many of you, you know, either via email, or I've met you at bowling, or we've chatted at SPEDPAC meetings. I just going on what Ethan had said, we've been working really hard with increasing engagement with our internal partners. I want to thank the Office of Community Engagement for having this, but we've been working with Welcome Services, with Parent University, and very importantly with our English language learner groups, in, you know, helping to develop some outreach and programming for our families of students with disabilities and EL families. And also doing some work along outreach to families and connecting them at the school level, and in conjunction with some of our really awesome community-based organizations that we are part of, that come to our resource fair. So really about kind of bringing all of these groups together to provide very important resources for our families on behalf of their students with disabilities. So I've left my information up there. Please feel free to reach out to me by email or cell.
Thank you so much. So this is our opportunity for us to hear from you all on what's on your mind. I want to acknowledge that we have about 14 hands raised. We received lots of pre-submitted questions, and just to set your expectations, we're going to get through as many questions as we can, and then we're going to ask that when we take a raised hand that you please share just one question or comment and keep it to 1 minute. And my colleague Jelani Haynes will help me get through the questions. So Jelani, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Crystal, and good evening, everyone. For those of you who joined on later, welcome. We're gonna, as she mentioned, we are gonna rotate between pre-submitted questions and those who will be asking live questions. So I'm going to start with a live question. I'm going to start with a pre-submitted question for our panelists to respond. And the first question is, what is the district's plan to deliver occupational therapy, ABA, and speech therapy services in the fall? And if virtual, what kinds of things has the district done to prepare staff to deliver these services effectively as they pertain to IEPs and educational goals?
And I'll share that, you know, Tammy and Ethan, I know you'll be supporting Dr. Caselius during Q&A, so jump in whenever you need.
We got our experts there with Tammy and Ethan, so I'm going to let them take the hard questions. I'll take the easy ones.
Sure.
Well, certainly we have done work examining. Well, first of all, let me stop and say hi, everyone. I haven't probably met most of you, but some of you I have met and I haven't seen you for a long time, so it's good to see you. All right, back to the question. Good question, one that we certainly appreciate and have been grappling with. The one thing that we've learned is from the spring remote learning, how well or not well we did on that exact thing, and lots of other things related to remote learning. We've gathered that data to the extent that we can through our through the data that we gathered and through the Office of Special Education, but we also have now groups of educators and school leaders and other community experts gathering to help give us more of that information. So we have some ideas, but we don't know exactly which are the best ideas. Some of the ideas are to think through, first of all, we can't treat them all the same, right? ABA versus OT versus PT, those are all very unique skill sets. And for each one of our unique learners, those services look different because maybe it's a fine motor issue, maybe it's a gross motor issue, Maybe there are, you know, with regard to ABA, maybe it's sensory inputs. Certainly, all of those industries have gotten better in providing their services remotely and online, because throughout the nation we've had to. Certainly, we also can agree that the best way to do that is in person, where we can do hand over hand and touching our kids when we need to. But we maybe or may not be in that world by the time we enter reopening in the fall, because of we can't predict what the virus is doing. So we're continuing to work with various groups of parents to gather that data. We're pushing out a plan that then will go to the school leaders to work with your own communities on a school by school basis, given what's kids they have, the numbers of kids they have, and what are the challenges and strengths of those kids, to really come up with what the plan is that works best for each unique group of kids. I know that may sound like we don't know. What it really means is we're here to learn from you. So we understand the question. There is no easy answer. My bottom line is always, there's no one size fits all in special ed.
Thank you, Tammy. And Jelani, before you take the first live hand, I just want to remind everyone that we created this space especially for our special education community. So I just want to, you know, remind us to make space for families who have questions around special education. Go ahead.
Thank you, Crystal. We're now going to take a question from Madeline Doherty. Madeline, are you there? You just be sure to unmute yourself.
Hi, am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi. So my question is about the isolation for students who may test or may exhibit symptoms. If it's a student with significant behavioral needs from a special ed classroom or from a general ed classroom, who will be monitoring that child, and who will be, if it has to be one of the classroom staff, how will the rest of the classroom be supported?
I would suspect that a principal would probably be supporting that process, or other staff will be designated to support that process of making sure that the child's able to deregulate or come back down again, de-escalate.
And I would just add that having been just immediately a school leader and a student in a school with students with emotional impairments, that certainly the principal would jump in that case. One of our challenges that we're working through with facilities is that isolation room. I don't think the staffing in that case necessarily could provide challenges, but I don't see that as much of a challenge as making sure that we have that space. And once we have that space, I think that schools, particularly who serve students who may exhibit behaviors like that, are pretty good about being flexible, even in situations like this, so that the student is safe and adults are safe as well.
I can add to that we have done audits of every one of our school buildings, and we have identified at least one, and sometimes more than one, isolation room in each building that's related specifically to our COVID protocols.
And again, this is an area where we're really going to be counting on families to help us out and make sure that they don't send their kiddos with noses and colds and that they're sick. So we're going to be asking people to keep them home.
Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Madeline, for your question. I'm going to go back to a pre-submitted question. Earlier, Tammy made a reference to hand-over-hand assistance, so this is a question that's more in-depth with that. So there are students who will need hand-over-hand assistance and toileting needs where the 3 to 6 feet social distancing isn't possible. It would require that parents would take on the role of the one-to-one paraprofessional. And it's a two-part question, so bear with me. What will be the safety protocols for any in-person learning? And 2, will the parent be trained and compensated for this role, as one of us would have to take leave from our job in order to do the job of our child's one-to-one paraprofessional?
I'll give that a first go. I see that as two pieces. With regard to, do we recognize that there are unique situations with regard to both our staff's need for different safety protocols related to the needs of some of our learners? Absolutely. What have we done about that? We have ordered healthcare level PPE for special education staff that actually cannot maintain 6 feet of distance. For example, if you do need to toilet a child that you serve, you can't do that from a distance of 6 feet. I'm sorry, I'm realizing I'm speaking too fast for the interpreter. I apologize. So with that, we've ordered higher level of PPE, and we're working with parent communities to figure out what is the best solution for that for your own child. The second piece of it, assuming that a parent is going to become an employee of the district, is frankly the first time I've heard that. So I'm happy to think that through, but nobody has raised that before, so I don't have an answer for you quite yet.
Thank you, Tammy. Is anybody else responding to that? All right, we'll move to another live question from Julio Sanchez. All right, Julio, if you're gonna mute yourself, actually, yeah, if you're gonna mute yourself, Julio. Yep, you just did it. You unmute yourself again, Julio.
There you are.
There you go. Yes. Hi, Julio. Do you have a question for us?
Yes.
You can share it. Julio, are you ready to share your question?
No.
Okay, we can come back to you, but thank you very much, Julio. We'll come back to you.
Oh.
We'll go to the next person in line for questioning. That is Courtney Feely-Karp. Courtney, just need you to unmute yourself.
I think I am unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay. My question had to do with the simultaneous teaching. And could you expand upon what that will look like for kids who are virtually learning? I'm thinking in particular, our child has an IEP that has all sorts of accommodations, such as preferential seating, language boards, and other sort of accommodations for particularly group activities. And if she's learning remotely, you know, it's not necessarily how her specific accommodations, but can you give us a better understanding of how the simultaneous teaching in the classroom and remotely is going to work during the all virtual? For instance, in a small reading group on Zoom, the teacher could bring up, you know, on the whiteboard, appropriate tools to support her in reading, etc. But I'm just really at a loss to understand how that's going to work with this simultaneous model.
I'm not, I understand the question. I didn't understand what you were talking about with regard to bringing up the whiteboard. So I can't really respond to that.
Well, I can clarify that if that's
okay,
helpful.
great.
So what I'm saying is when it was all virtual, so there was one teacher and a handful of kids doing, you know, a reading group, the teacher was able to share screen either with the whiteboard or with a pre-existing language board to support particularly our child and other kids with special needs with the reading activity. And what I'm wondering is, you know, how, I'm using that merely as a hypothetical example. The broader question, which is, that's an all virtual model. In this simultaneous model, how is a teacher supposed to do a reading group in the classroom and do a reading group with my child and provide those kind of supports if everything's supposed to be done simultaneously? I'm not trying to be thick. I'm just not, I'm not seeing it. I'm not understanding how that's going to work.
And the reason that you're not seeing it and don't necessarily understand it is because it is a huge ask. We understand that. But in the same way that that teacher, when everything was virtual, could do that online and remotely, we are looking to make sure that we've provided enough supports for our teachers when they're in the classroom so that they can also do that while they're also running the reading group for the groups that are in front of them. So for example, if you had 30 kids on a Zoom call, or 20, which many teachers did during the spring, they ran those Zoom calls and those reading groups with 20 kids participating electronically. If you instead take 10 of those and put them in seats in front of me, but keep the 10 that are on the screen, okay, that piece is the same. How do I then interact with the 10 that are in front of me, keep their attention and keep them engaged while I'm still doing this? Tougher lift, but not impossible to do, as long as you have the technological supports to make that a little easier. For example, to make sure that I can always see those 10 kids that are remote in the same way I can see these 10 that are sitting in front of me. More importantly, that the 10 that are on the Zoom can hear the 10 in the room as well. I use as an example for this, sorry, slowing it down again. I use as an example when we go to a conference and there are people remotely coming in. I need to be able to hear them, whether you're at the table with me or whether you're over a phone line. And that is supported by technology. And so we are working to make that all available, and then also to train our teachers on what those tools are to make it easier for them to do. Even with that, I fully acknowledge that's hard, but I also know that there's lots of schools that are doing that, including in our own state. And so we're learning from them as we go.
I think also, Tammy, and to the questioner, I think that there's going to be opportunities for some use of the paraprofessionals in the classroom, also use of some of the one-to-ones, some of the co-teaching models, some of our teachers who may be doing remote, but then could do some of the part for some of the other students who are in the classroom with a different type of grouping or pair-to-pair. So I think that there's some different ways that teachers will come up and creative ways to be able to interact with students. You know, one creative idea I heard about was student buddies, a student buddy system where students are working with one another as well, and like a pair share. So there are some different methodologies that teachers will be creating. I don't know that it'll be simultaneous 100% of the time. You know, maybe some project-based learning that students are doing as well mixed in there. So we'll still see, and our teachers are working in their working groups right now, trying to figure out what they can do and how they can better learn.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Dr. Caselius, and thank you, Courtney, for your question. Our next pre-submitted question pertains to evaluations. And the question reads, there are some students with suspected learning differences who were not able to be evaluated due to COVID-19 school closures. Upon reopening, are there plans to monitor, evaluate, and support new students who enroll in either a hybrid or virtual setting? And then the second part to that question is, what is the timeline for these tests to be completed in order for them to start receiving services?
Yes, so special ed services, I know that Ethan can talk about that. For students with EL, I know that we had some special testing that was done for our students who speak other languages. We were doing that during the remote learning period, and that will commence in person as if it's possible. And then also just academically, we plan on looking at where students are with some of their formative assessments. But one thing we don't want to do is, like, right away when we get to school, start testing kids. We want to take account, you know, and have our practices in place to take account for their social, emotional, and health and well-being, and reconnect as a community, teach the safety protocols, make sure that all kids are on, you know, understand all of that, and build community before we start moving into all of the testing. If there is required evals that need to be done, though, that will be done with the IEP team. And Ethan, maybe you can talk to that process.
Sure. Yeah, we are working with our school psychologists to figure out what that plan will look like to address those. But certainly I would start with it. My understanding is that the timelines for testing once school opens will be back in place, so that we will need to adhere to those guidelines that are according to the state guidelines. So what we are also trying to figure out on the testing side is how to address the backlog from when we were out. And so that is a plan that we are in conversations with about right now. The only other piece I would add is that there's also the early childhood piece, where there are kids who are aging into the public school system and from early intervention. And we are working with the early childhood team to look at that as well. Good news, the state has said that, or many of the CBOs that provide those services are continuing those services until the transition into the school setting has begun. So, so that's a little bit on the testing piece.
Thank you, Ethan. Thank you, Dr. Caselli. We're going to move now to Elizabeth Gomes. And Elizabeth, we just need you to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hi, how are you?
Doing all right.
I have a comment to make. First of all, virtual learning is not appropriate for our autistic kids. It's not. It doesn't work. It's causing regression for them. Second of all, I'm very disappointed in this meeting because it is a meeting where we, the parents, we have concerns. It should have been where you emailed the what's the word I'm looking for?
The link?
Yeah, no, the script of what was going on. That way the parents would have been very prepared to turn around and have an open discussion without pre-questions that people have set in. I mean, we're the parents, we know our kids. And by wasting 45 minutes to read out a script, it's gonna leave a lot of parents out of questions that they need to ask. I mean, I understand this is new and stuff like that, but I feel like as parents, we are not being heard enough when it comes to our special needs kids. And our kids are aged out at the age of 22.
Elizabeth, I just want to say that we definitely, empathize with your concerns, and we thank you for that, for sharing that concern. What we can do is, so we are recording this meeting. We're going to share it on our website, and it sounds like you would appreciate kind of just some preparation information ahead of time. So that's definitely some information that we can take into account for a future meeting. So maybe sharing, the draft PowerPoint ahead of time, or at least the most up-to-date PowerPoint that we've had up to that date, sharing it ahead of time so that parents can kind of prepare themselves for the different questions that they may have. So thank you. I think that's a really great concern that you're sharing, and we really appreciate it. And we do want to hear from you. So I'm glad that you're on this call.
Crystal, one other thing too for parents, these are pretty high level informational meetings, but your school principals will be back in August, and they will be having meetings as well with families and explaining much of this to our families and working with their parent councils to answer all of their questions, to make sure that they understand all of the protocols particular to that school facility and all of the needs of the children in their care. So our principals will be hosting their own parent meetings as well, beginning in August.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for your comment, your suggestion, and thank you, Dr. Caselli and Crystal, for your responses. Our next pre-submitted question asks, students with low incidence disabilities such as blindness and virtual impairment have lost skills due to the limitations of teaching Braille, cane travel, and technology remotely. Even if they were to return for in-person instruction, how will you ensure that they receive compensatory services? And will you prioritize low incidence disabilities when you consider after school, weekend, and special programs?
Ethan, do you want to start with that?
Sure, I can start with compensatory services. So we're actually this week, compensatory service guidance is supposed to come out from DESE, which has unfortunately not been released yet. We absolutely want to do the right thing by our kids, and we know that there has been learning loss. And so the question is, what we're really waiting for from the state is, what is the right way for us to do that. Is it through a formal IEP meeting? Is it through an informal meeting with families to make sure they understand the process? And what is the actual structure that is going to happen by? Because all those questions, as Tammy said earlier, are really individualized, and we need to have individualized conversations about each kid and what they lost and what they need to be able to do. So we're looking for that guidance so that we can come back to you and say, here's the process by how we're going to have these conversations. And that's, so hopefully that will come out this week and we'll be able to come back to you with that.
Thank you, Ethan. We're going to take a question now from Heron, and my apologies if I'm getting any of the participants' names or saying their names incorrectly. Heron? And we just need you to unmute yourself.
Yep, this is Heron. I have just a pretty straightforward question about how schools and bus folks are being instructed to keep kids from touching each other and breathing on each other. I mean, that's just, I want to know.
I think that's a great question too. The CDC guidelines, as I said earlier, or I think as the superintendent said, is that kids need to be kept 1 kid per bench in a yellow school bus and wear a mask. And by doing those things and have washed their hands, which is why we're installing bus hand sanitation facilities on our buses. We're assigning seats. I have raised 3 children. I know that when my kids were kindergartners, I might have said, you sit in your seat on the bus, and I would have no idea whether they did or didn't when the bus left. We are trying to hire many more monitors to be on our buses to help enforce those social distancing guidelines and the wearing of masks. One of the asks that I have for you is if any of you are interested or know people who are, please point them to our website so that we can get as many monitors hired as possible so that we have adults on the buses who can do that work of helping to keep kids where it is they're supposed to be. Our bus drivers have a job, and it's driving a bus, and they can't simply pull over and tell people to get back in their assigned seats. That may or may not be why some parents are thinking hard, and rightly so, about whether or not they feel safe on a bus. We're doing everything we can to make the buses as safe as we can. But we would do better if we had more people to hire as monitors so we could have 1 per bus.
Thank you.
So get the word out. We need monitors to apply for our jobs, and we have food nutrition staff jobs available as well, and custodial jobs available. So we'd love to have you apply at Boston Public Schools /.org at /careers, I think.
Ethan?
Jelani, if I could just go ahead for a moment, I realized there was a part of that last question that I left out around prioritizing low incidence disabilities. And that is a conversation that we have been wrestling with for some time here, and what that would look like. And so how do you prioritize some populations and also make sure you're dealing with all the equity issues involved with that? And as Dr. Casellia said at the outset, we've had a number of equity roundtables with a bunch of different stakeholder groups. And through those, we are hoping to come to an answer with if and how we will be able to prioritize different student populations.
Thank you, Ethan, for jumping back to that. Thank you, Dr. Casellius, and thank you, Heron, for the question. Sorry, I muted myself unnecessarily. So someone pointed out that class sizes are 8 to 10 students and 1 teacher. In classes with students with severe disabilities, the class size is 8 students, 1 teacher, and 2 class paraprofessionals. In addition, in addition to those numbers, any child has a 1-to-1 para will also be in the class. So what is the maximum number of people allowed in class, including students school staff, a service provider, and whomever else may be necessary?
That answer is dependent on the size of the actual classroom, which of course varies in every building. We have pulled and analyzed the blueprints of every classroom to figure that out on some level. And now as we release this documentation to our school leaders, we will have them walking through their buildings, because we simply can't tell by a blueprint that we know every space that's actually used for learning. So if in fact the space is large enough to keep all of those 8 kids 6 feet apart, then those 8 kids might be able to be there all at one time if that's what the parents chose, and if that was what was recommended by, and the staff felt able to do that. If, however, only 4 of those kids would fit in the space, then only 4 of those kids would be able to be there at one time, and we would be back to the hybrid hopscotch model of 2 days here and 3 days off. So again, those are decisions that we have to make on a case-by-case basis with the school community, which is why we urge all of you who are involved with special needs kids to participate on that school-based discussions, because that you're going to have more input there with regard to your own kid, because you know what those spaces are. We will also repurpose spaces if we can. So if there's a gymnasium space, can we use that if we spread it out larger? Is there library space? Can we use that? Now, some schools have that, some don't, which again rolls back to it's going to have to be a school by school determination within the guardrails that we've set up of 6 feet apart.
Thank you, Tammy. And we're now going to go to Nicole Favorito. Nicole, are you there?
I'm here. Hi, everybody.
Hello there.
Hi.
Hi. So I have, I guess, a 2-part question. Number one, we're transferring from another Mass district. So my question is how you plan on handling transfers and getting to know them and all of that. And then specifically speaking about my daughter who has dyslexia, and she's still a non-reader going into 2nd grade. I thought their previous district did an okay job, but being a working mom, working from home, I thought that they put too much of it in the parents' lap. And as a result, I think my daughter is even further behind. I understand the importance of her reading by 3rd grade based on statistics. So I'm really concerned and want to know how you plan on catching up a child like my daughter and in this type of situation.
So first, let me say welcome to Boston Public Schools. We're so happy to have your daughter here. And then I'm going to turn it, Crystal can probably talk about registration, and then Ethan can talk about how your child would be serviced.
So in terms of being welcomed, I know that
or Miriam's on, actually. Miriam, could you talk to us about registration?
The registration is ongoing, and we can connect you with our welcome services department. So I will, if you, I will put my email on the chat, and if you don't mind sending me an email, I'll make sure to connect you with the right staff person to help.
sounds good. Thank you, Miriam.
Yeah, and I would just add on the, within the IEP process, as I said at the beginning, the IEP needs to be honored, and we will work. We have a process in the special education department for transfers that come in, and doing a conversion meeting in the appropriate time so that that can happen. And I just also want to acknowledge, really appreciate the, challenge you have with having a student who's behind and being worried about making sure that they are caught up by 3rd grade as full readers. And so just really appreciate that. But we will, once the IEP, once we get it converted, we will make sure that it's implemented and updated. And beyond that, I would just add that one of the things that I have found has gone well, or can go well, if done by really really good teachers, that reading instruction actually can work well online remotely. So I think that in a hybrid model where you're getting double dose, where you're getting a dose of in-person and a dose of remote, that I think we would be able to hopefully get someone caught up. We have another number of mechanisms in BPS to do that, but obviously it depends on your individual child's needs.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists, and again, welcome, Nicole, and thank you for your question. Students with severe disabilities require a lot of support that cannot be replicated at home. Would it be possible for these students to attend school every day instead of having a split schedule? If school does not happen in September, would it be possible for students with severe disabilities to attend?
That is a great question, and one we've been grappling with for months as well, or at least weeks. I don't know, time has gotten away from me. One of the things, I met with the parents from the Carter School about that very topic. And certainly, again, I want to underline, every kid is different, and so is every family. And every family is going to have a choice here as to whether or not they believe their child would be best participating fully remotely or participating in the hybrid model. We would like to provide that flip of the option for our most vulnerable students. Could we provide the option of families opting into full-time in person? Here's why I can't tell you the answer yet. We need to confirm with our families how many of them are going to keep their kids fully remote. The more families who choose that, the more seats, if you will, open up full-time in the buildings. The more of those seats that I had to fill, the more I could perhaps fill them with families who wanted to have their kids all 5 days a week. But it's like the game of dominoes. I have to do one thing and find out before I can do the next thing. And so that's why we are now pushing out 2 families in the next week to start asking, how many of you want to keep your child fully remote at all, so that we can start gathering the numbers so I can better answer your question next time we talk.
And that survey will be identifiable, so then our schools will have that specifically, and they'll know how to match that then with their facilities and the spaces that they have. So it won't just be an open survey, we'll be able to match with the school.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Dr. Caselius. We're now going to hear from Nina Reis.
And sorry, before Nina speaks, Jelani, I just wanted to do a quick time check. We have about 10 minutes left. There are 40 hands raised, so clearly we won't get to all of them. We'll probably get to Nina and then Cornicia, and then Jelani, you can probably, summarize any last things from the pre-submitted questions.
And you will share also, Crystal, the other meetings that we'll be having, or can you put that in the chat so that people have that and they can see where the link is?
Yep, absolutely. So Alba's been managing our chat, and she put in the reopening webpage. So that's where you can find continuous meetings. So
it's already up.
Hey, Nina.
Yeah, hi, this is Jeff on behalf of Nina. So first of all, thank you guys. Going back to school is complicated. This makes it exponentially complicated. I appreciate you guys trying to answer the unanswerable here. My question, is really for kind of all students, but very particular to with underlying autoimmune disorders, which are, particularly, COVID risk cases. So, having dealt with this in a corporate environment for 3 months, the light area, based on the CDC guidelines, is the list of possible COVID symptoms looks disease, cough, sniffle, fever, stuffy head. What's your process for kind of quarantine, or even your authority to students that kind of are in that gray area of, I'll call, likely COVID? There's a 14-day incubation period and lots of research on pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic transmission. So my biggest concern is, how do we get an early warning flag for possible exposures, and out, as quickly as possible if needed?
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Nina.
I'm happy to jump in on that. It was a little garbled, so I maybe didn't hear it all. but what I heard was, what are the protocols in place? COVID looks a lot like other illnesses. How will we enforce, and do we have the authority to enforce quarantining, and how will that work? Here's what I can tell you. Our student health services, our BPS nurses, who are heroes, have been working hand in hand with the Boston Public Health Commission to develop and have approved all those protocols. So let's just ground it in reality. A kid comes to school. A kid is required to have done a home health checklist at home every day, just like every staff person at BPS has been required to do for months. The kid comes to school though, and somebody thinks they've got a runny nose, or they look like they maybe don't feel well, or the kid says they don't feel well, and they get sent to the nurse's office. The nurse has a strict set of protocols to do an evaluation about, is this potential COVID? Is it not? And certainly we understand that COVID symptoms and the flu look a lot alike. We then have arranged to try and get people, we will not be testing students in schools. Our nurses aren't able to do testing, but we are working with the Boston Public Health Commission to get students who are suspected of either exposure or symptoms of COVID into immediate testing, either through their own health provider or through the community testing sites, which, if you don't know about them, there's a map of them, and we'll put that on our website as well, because everyone should know where those are. And then if there is a positive test, okay, now we know that. And then there are strict public health quarantine guidelines that we do have the authority to enforce and will. And so the students simply won't be able to come back to school until they meet those requirements, which right now require a positive or a negative test after the end of a quarantine period. I can't tell you what the public health guidelines are going to be in 5 weeks, but I can tell you that the moment they change, the BPS nurses will know about it. That's how closely they're working with the Health Commission on these topics.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one more question, pre-submitted questions, and then our last question will come from Cornisha. My daughter's school has windows that open about a few inches from the bottom. They don't allow a breeze into the class. What data are we using to be sure that the amount of air circulation in each classroom is sufficient, even with windows open? And then what's the plan after November or possibly October when it gets cold?
Right now, the current CDC guidelines and the DESI guidelines that came out last week, I think it was Friday, might have been Thursday, related to facilities specifically require two things. One, if you have mechanical air filtration systems, you need to upgrade those systems with the best filters and make sure you have a scheduled system of changing those filters. We've done that, but only 31 of our schools have those systems. Both the CDC and the DESI guidance also say, if you don't have those systems, because most public school districts in the nation do not, you need to ensure that you're getting as much outdoor air into your buildings, and specifically both the CDC and the DESI guidelines say by opening windows and doors. So we have done an audit of all of our school buildings with regard to which windows need repairs in order to actually be able to be opened in a safe manner. We're also now working with school leaders to figure out what are the learning spaces that they've used historically that have no windows, and how do we move learning out of those spaces into other spaces. So like everything else, there's a lot of variability about that in each school building, but we understand the issue and are working hard to make sure that we've met the guidance that we need to so that we can keep kids safe.
Thank you, Tammy. And our last question will come from Danielle Tierney. And to those who we did not get to, again, we apologize, and we thank you nonetheless for being a part of the meeting. And ask that you stay engaged with us through either the reopening website, bostonpublicschools.org/reopening, and through some of the emails that have been provided in the chat. And with that, Danielle.
Can I quickly say one other thing, Daniel, just quickly? Also, I just want to know that this was for students with disabilities, but also I just want to make sure that questions on 504, so 504s will also be honored and enforced. So I just want to make sure that's clear as well.
Thank you.
Okay, Danielle.
Hi, thank you. As others have mentioned, my son has autism and has had tremendous regression. His regression has just plummeted over the last several months. And so I also was seeking for in-person services to commence forthwith. I was wondering if the district has considered paying for students that are looking for the option to go in person to other districts that are actually going in person. Is that a discussion?
That has not been an issue that's been raised to me. I will pause to see if either Ethan or the superintendent want to say they've heard about it. That has not been raised to me yet. So thank you for raising it.
I have not, but I would bet that would be something to bring to the IEP team for services. But
I've been sending emails nonstop, incessantly for months. I've sent some to Ethan. I've worked with Cindy Nielsen. You know, my son can barely leave the house anymore. He's regressed so much. So
I'm so sorry for that. So why don't we get your email and address? So
can you please email, and I'll have my team put it in the chat, community@bostonpublicschools.org. Alba,
yes, ma'am. I would love to. I've been sending emails for months and months and months. So it's frustrating and insulting when you continuously get emails saying, share your feedback, but you can't even get in touch with someone to help you.
Thank you, Danielle.
I'm happy to put our email in the chat box. And my email, yes, Lisa Connors is there as well.
Or just put your phone number in there and get back to you right away.
We'll be sure to contact, or I'll be sure that Danielle is contacted tomorrow. So thank you so much, Danielle. I just
thank you.
Thank you. I want to reiterate that yes, this isn't the final meeting. I know had concerns about this is a lot of information, and everyone is doing the best that they can. You parents are doing really the best, a tremendous job with your children. So you know, we are really grateful for that. And I just want to wrap up by saying we have a bunch of meetings still coming up, and we hope that you can stay engaged with us. www.bostonpublicschools.org/reopening. Please feel free to attend multiple meetings. The information is always being updated, so it's important that we stay engaged all the time. If you have any additional questions, if you weren't able to ask your question today, please feel free to email communityengagement@bostonpublicschools.org. That's also now in the chat, and we promise that we will get back in touch with you. So we really appreciate your time. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Casalius to say any closing remarks.
Well, I'd like to thank the team here for putting on this forum again. We have enough forums still available to give high-level information and to get your questions. And also we'll have a FAQ on our website so that you can get your questions answered, as other documents that we are developing each and every day to get the information out so that it's digestible and easy to understand. I do want to thank you parents for all that you're doing. I know that this has been disproportionately much harder on you and on your children. And so we recognize that, and we want nothing more than to welcome your children back as soon as possible to get them the services that they need and that they deserve. And to be your partner. So I thank you so for all that you're doing. And for that, I'll say good night.
Yes, and a special thank you also to SpedPAC. They did a lot of outreach for this meeting, helping to get the word out. We had up to 310 participants on this call. And so thank you, SpedPAC, for your collaboration. Thank you to the Office of Special Education. We really appreciate you all, and we look forward to staying in touch. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Interpreters, great job.
Thank you.